Sisters, Susan and Linda, purchased a lovely Queen Anne house on 6th Street, South 6th Street, a number of years ago. Oh, gosh, it was in sorry shape. But today, it has regained its former grandeur. The wooden house has delicate blue and white shingles. On the inside, there are gleaming hardwood floors, pocket doors, brass light fixtures, carved fireplace mantels, and a ghost of a little girl in a white dress. Well, Susan suspected that something was afoot when they started to restore the house. Things would disappear and turn up in other parts of the residence. Radios would turn on and off by themselves. Strange creaks and groans emanated from the landing at the base of the stairs by the front door. Invisible footsteps seemed to skip across the floor near the entryway. At sunset, loud knocks echoed at the door, but when Susan rushed to answer it, there never was anybody there. Now, one day, there came an interesting discovery. As they cleaned the wooden mantelpiece in the dining room, a panel gave way, and it revealed a small, hidden compartment. Susan reached inside and removed an old black and white photograph. It was of a young child, a girl perhaps 8 years old. She wore a simple white dress of the kind that was worn in the 1900s. Susan propped the relic on the shelf above the fireplace and went back to work. But when she woke up in the morning and came down to the dining room, well, the picture was gone. Nobody had a clue what had happened to it. And that night, at sunset, 3 loud raps were heard at the front door. And when the door was opened, there wasn't a soul in sight. Unseen footsteps pitter-pattered across the floor. However, there was a fleeting glimpse of a small girl in a simple white dress on the landing at the bottom of the stairs. One instant she was there, and the next minute she was gone. Now, over the next several weeks, more than one person reported seeing the sightings of this little girl in the white dress. Was it that same little girl whose photograph had been discovered behind the mantel? One day, there came a knock at the door, and when Susan went to answer it, somebody was there, and there stood an elderly, spry woman who informed Susan that she and her parents had lived in the house many years before. The woman asked to come inside and see the place, and Susan was happy to oblige, especially since the lady had so many memories of the house that she wanted to share. They sat down to some coffee, and one story in particular made Susan sit up straight and take notice. It was during the Great Depression, and times were tough, and the woman's family had to take in boarders, and one of them was a single mother who rented the room at the top of the stairs. She had an 8-year-old daughter, but the girl, she had some kind of behavioral problems and was often locked in the room. Now, one night, around sunset, somebody came knocking at the front door. The family who owned the house, they were in the backyard and they didn't hear any knocking. And so the woman who rented the room at the top of the stairs, she emerged from her room and came down and answered the door. She forgot to close her own door behind her, though, and her daughter ran from the room and down the stairs and through the open front door. She ran right into the street and was killed by a passing car. Now, not too long after the little girl's funeral, residents of the Queen Anne house on South 6th Street started hearing creaks and groans and invisible pitter-patters of small footsteps near the front door. Well, soon her ghost was seen on the landing of the stairs. Susan and Linda believe that her spirit still resides in their home to this very day.
According to most, this haunting is connected to the stately St. James Court flats. It was one of the first apartment dwellings in this area. It was built around 1897. And at the time, apartments weren't welcome in the midst of single-family dwellings on the grand St. James Court. Residents feared an apartment building, especially a six-story one like the one that was proposed. It would bring down property values for sure, they thought. And they took the designer, a Mr. Conrad, to court. Well, Mr. Conrad prevailed, however, and the neighbors had to accept that a six-story building was going to be built in their midst. A ghostly ragamuffin haunts St. James Court, and people who have seen him always describe him the same way. A young child, in tattered clothes, covered with soot and ashes. He appears only during the cold months, when frost covers the ground. And that's why they call him the Ice Boy. Yep, the Ice Boy. Oh, but today the St. James Court flats, they don't have 6 floors. Oh, that's because on the evening of February 4th, 1912, there was a mysterious fire that engulfed the structure. Rumor had it that a disgruntled neighbor had set fire as an act of revenge. Whatever the cause, it was a terrible blaze and people were trapped above. Fortunately, everyone got out. And the next morning, throngs turned out to behold a spectacular sight. The water sprayed by the fire brigades, it had frozen in place, and what they found was a charred ruin sheathed in a thick layer of ice. It looked like a giant stalagmite of dirty crystal rising from St. James Court. But with the first snowfall, reports of a phantom surfaced. Late at night, a spectral street urchin in tattered rags was seen running around the famous fountain in front of the flats. Sometimes he's seen in the building itself. People said that his face was streaked with dirt and ash, and that ice lay on the ground. Instead of rebuilding the entire structure, the new owner chose to remove the topmost floors and the severely damaged ones, and they were taken away too, and repair was only done to the bottom portion. So in the end, the neighbors got what they wanted. A 3-story building that didn't overshadow the lovely mansions of St. James Court. Instead of gloating because they got their way in the end. The local residents were happy that nobody had perished in the blaze. Oh, and yet, that's when another rumor was heard. Someone had indeed perished in the fire, but no one was talking about it. It's believed that his ghost wanders this area on frosty mornings, looking for the recognition that his death never received. On the brittle cold night of the fire, a young boy from the nearby cabbage patch, the poor part of the neighborhood, was out making grocery deliveries to earn extra money for his family, and well, he had dropped off a box of groceries at an apartment on the top floor of the flats, and because it was so bitterly cold out, he lingered just a bit to warm up in the hallway before going back outside, and he was up there when the fire broke out. They weren't able to get to him, and the next day his soot-covered body was found huddled in a corner. Because he wasn't from one of the wealthy families of St. James Court, well, the newspaper, they never even reported his death. There's no snow on the ground this month, so there's no need to worry about the ice boy, but come to St. James Court once winter hits, you might have a chilling encounter. Keep your eye out for the little boy with the soot-covered face, because he might be seeing the ice boy of St. James Court.
Sometimes her cries can be heard echoing throughout the neighborhood. They call her the Lady of the Stairs, but according to local lore, they called her Miss G when she was alive. The G stood for Gathright, one of the prominent local families. Miss G's family, why, they hailed from Bourbon City of Bardstown, and half an hour south of Louisville. At the corner of 3rd and Ormsby stands an impressive neoclassically inspired First Church of Christ Scientist. Built in 1916, it's the location of one of the most famous haunts in the neighborhood. The spirit of a lovely young woman in a white gown, seen the evenings pacing back and forth across the steps. Legend has it that it's Miss G. Graduated from high school in 1918, and, well, back then, her parents and her, well, they thought that she was ready for marriage and arranged for a lucrative match into one of the local distilling families. The wealthy man they chose for their daughter was considerably older. When she found out about this man, why, she refused. Not because he was older, but because she was already in love with somebody. Well, several months before, Miss G had met a dashing young soldier at a party, and they fell in love. World War I was raging in Europe, and he was fighting in Belgium, but he had earned some leave and found himself in Bardstown. He courted Miss G, and he promised to come back and marry her after the war was ended and he was discharged. When Miss G's parents heard this news, however, they weren't very happy. Oh no! To keep their daughter away from this young man, they sent her to old Louisville to live with an aunt and uncle who could keep watch over her. Now, what Miss G's parents didn't know was that the young soldier loved their daughter so much that when he was discharged and sent back to the United States, he re-enlisted in the army, knowing that they would station him in Louisville at Camp Zachary Taylor, which is barely 2 miles from the steps of that church. As it turns out, it was very easy for Miss G to see her fiancé. Across from the church, there was a popular ice cream parlor. And most evenings, Miss G told her aunt that she was just going to go meet her friends there. Well, however, after a few minutes, she quickly would leave and hurry to the steps of the church where her boyfriend waited. Oh, and for several weeks they met like that. Met on the sly. And they eventually decided to run away together and elope. They planned on meeting there the next night, and then they would get a taxi to take him downtown. And from there, they'd get an overnight train to Chicago, where the young man had some relatives, and they could get married and stay with them, and then maybe slowly break the news to Miss G's parents. But that next night, something happened. Something happened, and the young man, he never showed up. According to her friends at the ice cream parlor, Miss G had shown up that evening with a small suitcase at her side, and she chatted for a little bit, and then she made her way over to the steps to wait. And although she hadn't told anybody about her plans, they had figured it out. They actually felt so sorry for her because they hoped that she'd make it away okay and just be happy. Miss G, she went to the steps to wait. And while she waited, she paced back and forth. The evening wore on, but the young man, he didn't show. Later that night, after all the shops closed up and the people were walking home, they saw Miss G. She was pacing back and forth, and some called up to her to see if she was okay, and they told her that it was late. It was too late and too cold to be out alone, and that she should just go on home. But no, she shook her head no and told them just not to worry and that she would be fine. The following day, everybody assumed that Miss G had made it to Chicago and would soon be married. But when the sun went down that evening, there she was again, pacing back and forth in front of the massive columns of the church. But this time, however, she looked pale and sickly. And when people called out to her, it was as if she couldn't even hear them or even see them. And she just paced back and forth as if in a trance. The next night, the same thing again happened. When the sun went down, Miss G appeared on the steps. Oh, she looked mighty sickly this time. Oh, she was nervously walking back and forth, and people could hear her sobbing as she paced to and fro. The residents of old Louisville started to wonder what was going on with her. The next day they found out. The young soldier never showed up because he had taken ill. This happened during the Spanish flu outbreak in Louisville, and he was one of many soldiers that were stricken at Camp Zachary Taylor. He came down with the flu during the day and was quarantined. In his delirium, he tried to explain that his girlfriend was waiting for him, but nobody, they didn't understand what he was talking about, and the word never got back to Miss G. She waited in that cold night air, pacing back and forth into the wee hours of morning. Well, finally, she gave up and went home. She was devastated. She assumed that her boyfriend had abandoned her. The saddest part is that she contracted the Spanish flu as well. Oh, standing out in that cold weather made her ever so sick. Oh, dear Lord. Well, to be honest with you, to be perfectly honest, 2 days later, Miss G died. Miss G and her boyfriend, they were dead and buried. Each went to their grave, never knowing what happened to the other. They say that Miss G's spirit haunts these steps, waiting for her young soldier to show up and take her away.